where we are as a nation is terrible. I'm not surprised. Anyone who watches this show is not surprised. I told you they were going to keep coming until they got him. It's awful, though. Let's ask his son about it. Big fans. Donald Trump Jr. joins us now, host of Triggered on Rumble. What a great score that was for Rumble. Don, it's your dad's, not my dad, but I'll tell you what, I guarantee you I'm not the only household out there where they're down and out, not just on behalf of your dad, for what it means for the country, man. It's a bad place to be.
It really is, Jesse. I mean, again, I think perhaps I've gotten used to this garbage over the last 6 years, just day in and day out, it never ends. But perhaps the worst part about, and maybe it's also the good, right? You got to look at the good and the bad. Perhaps the worst part about what's going on right now is that we're all realizing that we're much further down the rabbit hole than we ever thought we were. Yeah. The other side has, their plans to take over, the communist sort of plan to take over is actually much further along than perhaps we ever imagined as Americans, as patriots. I know we talk about this all the time. They're never going to stop. And perhaps this is what we needed now, actually fully understanding just how far we have fallen. Perhaps the country, the things that we believe, our freedoms, they're actually probably past the brink. And that's why we have to work all the harder to pull them from that point. I think, I don't think I'm naive to this stuff anymore. I certainly would have been 6 years ago when all of it started. The FBI, these are good people. They're doing what's right for the country. Nope, wrong. The CIA said it, so there has to be some truth to it, right, Jesse? Nope, wrong. Our generals, they're just looking out for our best. No, they're not. None of these things are true. And each and every day, we see how much further it is. And now this is sort of, the crescendo, the culmination of all of that insanity. You see them going after their political rivals with a case that even the federal government, who actually has the jurisdiction over this stuff, even though it's past the statute of limitations, decided not to pursue. But a Soros-funded district attorney is doing his job, and George Soros is getting a great return on his investment. And the lackeys in the mainstream media are going after people like me saying, well, George Soros never directly met the guy. I didn't say he met him. He funded the super PAC to the tune of $1 million to elect this guy. And the leftist media is going into full force and effect, running cover for everything that's going on. And, guys like you and Jesse, guys like me, and I think we share a pretty common worldview as it relates to some of this stuff. We've been saying it out loud for a long time, but sometimes it takes this. It takes seeing it with your own eyes to actually be like, holy crap, those guys aren't insane. They're actually 100% right. We're not the conspiracy theorists. We're taking what we see every day and doing what rational people do and coming to a very reasonable conclusion. And I think the American people should be doing just that. And again, as awful as it is, for my family, it's just at this point, it's another Monday and tomorrow will be another Tuesday because I've been dealing with this for 6 years when they tried me for treason, a crime punishable by death. And, we've covered this. I understand I'm not the upstanding human being that Hunter Biden is, but I think if I were Hunter, I'd be in jail right now. And if I was doing the things that he was doing, it would be a big story, not covered up by the intelligence community, not whitewashed by big tech and mainstream media. It would be called out for what it is, which is corruption at the highest levels of government.
Maybe you're right. Maybe it is as dark as today and tomorrow are going to be, unprecedented dark. Maybe that is a good way to look at it. This is what the country needed. And you can shout it from the rooftops on your show, and you do all day long. I can shout it all day long. But sometimes people need to see something that truly, truly shocks them to actually wake up and realize where we are. So, okay, this is where we are. We have an incredibly corrupt system from the FBI on down. The breadth of that is part of what is so disheartening for so many people. And to be totally honest, Don, I'm not a defeatist. I think we'll be fine in the end. It's disheartening to me. I have moments, especially in the past 48, 72 hours, where I'm thinking, golly, I don't know how we're going to work our way out of this daggone thing. So where do we begin, Don? Where do we begin working our way out of it? I don't want to live in a country like this. You don't. Nobody does. What's step one? Not step 100. Where do we begin?
First of all, I think we all have to become unafraid. I think the number one thing that the other side has done is boxed anyone with a rational opinion into a corner. You know, if you don't believe every single thing of the ever-changing whims of the trans movement, then you can't be a part of polite society. You must agree with everything that they say. And if you don't, you're out. Now, they can change their mind every 2 seconds, and they get to set that. You know, they're not, you know, as far as the power of society, it feels like they're much more powerful than any group in this country, even if they only make it up a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of this country. And yet the world would have you believe that, you know, they are going through a genocide. I'm not aware of one. We saw this week, though, when, you know, a trans sociopath, after being jacked up with drugs and hormones for years and being fed a load of crap from their teachers from day one, and parents probably not allowed to partake in the journey because, you know, God forbid a parent actually had some say in what their children are indoctrinated with, can shoot up a group of Christians. It's not called a hate crime. It's not called anything. And then the country music television can do a whole thing about the trans genocide and awareness. And Bud Light can, I mean, you know, Bud Light has its own problems, but, you know, they can then recognize Dylan Mulvaney as, you know, that's their new spokesperson. I mean, man, it's almost hard. The jokes write themselves. But we're living in that reality, and that's what's going on day in and day out. It's just another example of that. So we have to become unafraid. If we band together, they can't cancel us all. But we saw they could take out the most powerful guy in the world, you know, and cancel him at any given time. But when people wake up and realize what's going on, and hopefully this is one of those instances where, you know, you get the proverbial kick in the groin and you have to get in the game. I hope that's what happens right now. And then, you know, the reality of this is election interference. They're trying to do that. If it was the other way around, they'd be screaming to the high heavens. They won't do that. But I think they're frankly concerned about what Trump does if he gets back in there. Now that he knows, you know, coming in as an outsider wasn't the easiest thing in the world. You, again, assume, and I was guilty of this myself, even when they were going after me, you assume, oh, well, these people, there must be something to it. There isn't. But now, you know, Donald Trump, as a lame duck, frankly, is far more dangerous to them than anything imaginable. And I think you got to go in there, you got to implement Schedule F, you got to get rid of the bureaucrats, you got to burn it down and start from scratch. And I think unless you do that, you know, some of that hope that we still have, that's probably gone.
Don, I don't want to be too over the top, but I've said this several times publicly before, so I can say it obviously to you. I view your dad as being the first of the system disruptors. We have a very corrupt system. The system did not want what it considers to be a virus like your dad to stop that corruption. So they come after him. Historically, the Roman Republic, all these things, system disruptors pop up, and then the system smashes them, and another one pops up, and another one smashes them. But speaking to you as a son instead of a commentator, I've worried publicly about your father's safety, and I still do to this day. You just mentioned what he would mean as a lame duck president. I got to be honest with you, Don, as evil and corrupt as this system is, I don't know that they'd let him live to see that day. I really don't.
Well, listen, I don't, you know, I would hope not, but yeah, like, does anything surprise you, right? Again, I would have thought that Anthony Fauci would function in the best interests of the people of the country in the midst of a pandemic. Like, of course they're doing it nobly and honorably and not covering up their nonsense. Like, of course, there's literally hundreds of millions of people and billions of people around the world. Again, you know, it's easy to sort of look, you know, at the time and be like, what? But you look back and be like, wait a second. No, there's actually no pretense of them functioning nobly. There, you must dispel those notions. And that's really hard to do, Jesse, as an American, someone who brought up wanting to believe these things. That's brutal, actually. And yet, I think you know that now. I don't think that there's anything that's off the table for them. And they've proven that over the last 6 years. There's literally nothing they wouldn't do to preserve their power, to enrich themselves for the future, to do so under the guise of, you know, protecting America. We see that every day with Ukraine. We certainly saw it during the pandemic. We saw it with the vaccine. It never ends. But again, maybe, you know, just like you need the great disruptor, maybe you need those terrible instances to actually get people to be like, oh my God, like it's broken. And that's a hard thing to come across. You know, I want to believe that we are the country we've been led to believe you know, we are our whole lives. But guess what, Jesse? We aren't, and we haven't been for a long time.
What a wake-up call, man. It's so true. I remember applying to the FBI when I was a kid. Not fake, I was a kid, but it was years. It was all I ever wanted, and my goodness, you couldn't pay me enough to join that place. Now, Don Jr., best of luck to you and your family. Just on a personal note, best of luck to y'all.
This has been a beautiful, beautiful life here in Wisconsin with all of you. And I wish Wisconsin the best of luck, because I think it's going to need it.
Ouch. Not the normal concession speech. That was Daniel Kelly after he got crushed in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. But we're not going to rehash all that again unless Ryan feels like it, because there's actually great news out there and great things happened that day in that state. Joining me now, somebody who's doing the work. You know, we talk about blocking and tackling on this show, local, school boards. Well, here's your guy to support. Ryan Gerdusky has the 1776 Project PAC, and they're out there blocking and tackling. Ryan, what'd you guys do in Wisconsin?
So we won 24 school board races in Wisconsin in what wasn't a great night for Republican candidates, although conservatives won also 3 ballot measures that night. People don't really remember. They won a ballot measure over welfare, that able-bodied people have to work before they can get welfare, and then 2 on crime. And half of our candidates that ran for school board, we had some candidates we knew were not going to be able to win in places that are super, super far left. But we won even in Milwaukee County. We won a school board race. We won a lot in the suburban counties outside of Milwaukee. And I think it's really, really important that a lot of issues that still suburban voters look towards are issues like quality of life, crime, and education that I think Republicans really should be talking more about and championing.
Ryan, people are going to find it surprising that you have this PAC out there winning school board races. Haven't you heard there's a presidential election coming up? Why do you care about school board?
Well, 26 states have school board elections this year. Our next school board election we're getting involved with is actually in Texas, which is on May 6th. And then Iowa is in June. So there is no reason why people should not be getting involved this early on when we have a presidential election a year and a half away, considering the metrics to sit there and change a lot of what we've had about education in our local communities is up this year, and in some places within just a few weeks. I think it's really important that conservatives sit there and really talk about these things that suburban voters used to vote Republican on, and really speak about it in a very nuanced way. You know, we've gotten very distracted, and rightfully we've talked about the issues of like Drag Queen Story Hour and CRT, which are major issues. I'm not undermining them. But we also have generational learning loss. We've had, because of Democrats, because of Democrat mask mandates and Democrat shutdowns, we've had generational learning loss. We have, in public schools in this country, in parts of public schools in this country, we have extreme violence that needs to be addressed. I think that there is a lot of things that we need to sit there and focus on that are in a very broad and message I think a lot of suburban voters would care about.
Okay, so I'm confused, Ryan. I don't understand how the voter thinks or why things work out this way, but you do this work, so you explain it to me. You win all these races in Wisconsin, and Daniel Kelly gets his doors blown off in Wisconsin. So voters walked to the polls and they voted for the 1776 Project Conservative and then voted for the nutball communists to sit on their Supreme Court? Why?
So 80% of Wisconsin voters voted to have a workforce thing against welfare, and 67% voted against 2 hard crime bills to protect people, to not let criminals go without bail, and then voted for a Supreme Court judge who does support bail. People are very nuanced, and because 2 things really worked against us. Daniel Kelly had just run in 2020, and he lost by, guess what, the same exact percentage he lost this time. He was a very, very bad candidate. He raised no money. He raised $900,000, and the Democrat, Janet, and I can't pronounce her last name, but Janet, the Supreme Court judge elect, she raised $12 million. And the difference was we have a lot of PAC money, but PAC money doesn't go as far in purchasing ads as direct campaign donations do. So the 1776 Project, we don't do direct ad buys, we do mailers. because that is the same price no matter who pays for it. But in the direct ad space, if you do commercials and you do ads online, you get a lot more bang for your buck if you're the candidate than if you're the PAC. So we had a lot of PAC money. We had very, very little candidate money. We had a candidate who was not very good. And Janet ran on two very important issues that Democrats have really managed to sit there and corner everyone on: abortion and democracy. The idea that Kelly is like Trump. Trump is against democracy, and she's going to protect abortion rights in Wisconsin. And I think that since the overturning of Roe, a lot of conservatives in some corners of the country who have been very, very, very aggressive on saying they're promoting the most strict abortion laws really have soured the whole entire party in other regions of the country. And Kelly was very, very conservative on abortion, and he had a lot of other talking points that were very, very strange for a candidate to talk about. He was more of a pundit than a candidate.
Okay, let's dig into the abortion thing, because this is something, as you well know, I am super, super passionate about, mega pro-life, but I want to win races without sacrificing what I believe, and I won't sacrifice what I believe, but I want to win. You're good at this stuff, the messaging stuff, to the Republicans or potential Republicans running, and maybe to me. How is that messaged, although I'm not running for office?
So people gave someone the Supreme Court gave a right to abortion for 60 years. And then all of a sudden one day that right doesn't exist anymore. It's very hard to take something away from somebody when they feel like it is a right. So that's the first thing running against us. And then when you dramatically change any law, whether it be Obamacare or Roe v. Wade, when you dramatically change something overnight, people have a natural pushback to it. It happens constantly in elections. So when states like Texas, for example, or now Florida and Georgia and Ohio have done the heartbeat bill or 6-week bans or 15-week bans, it is a dramatic change for a lot of people. And a lot of people have a natural pushback. You have a right, you don't have a right anymore. I think that what you should do, what the pro-life movement should be doing now, is in a lot of these purple states or bluish states or slightly red states, is sit there and do what they were doing pre-Roe. Sit there and start saying, okay, you cannot abort a child if it's viable in the womb. Start there. And maybe in a couple of years' time, you sit there and say, you know what, actually, we're going to go to 20 weeks. Actually, we're going to go to 15 weeks. No, we'll go to 12 weeks. You do that small chipping away. So it's like a frog boiling in water. So all of a sudden they sit there and they don't realize anything's changed, because most people in this country don't actually get abortions. When you look at the poll of, where is your local abortion clinic? Most people do not know. It is the idea of abortion that they are more, that women should have this right than the actual practice of that right. So it has to be a small incremental thing. We can't just open the doors and say, heartbeat bill nationwide, that's it, case closed. You're going to have a natural pushback.
The plan to get away from the dollar has been an open Chinese plan that they have written down for ages. It's not like they're coy about the whole thing. They've been writing it down. They've been shouting it from the rooftops. This was the Kenyan president.
For the people who work numbers, I am giving you free advice that those of you who are holding dollars, you surely might go into losses. You better do what you must do, because this market is going to be different in a couple of weeks.
Different in a couple weeks, Mark? What?
Yeah. Yes, the petrodollar, been around since essentially the end of World War II, and we use it for all of our oil exploration. When all countries having to buy oil have to use this. We are now seeing, chiefly because it's accelerating a lot of trends, but chiefly because this invasion of Ukraine and the United States reaction with their alleged sanctions against Russia. Odd how Russia seems to be doing better and better no matter how many sanctions we impose. But Russia and India, you played that clip there. You have China involved. All of these countries are moving off the US dollar as a petrocurrency, which means our politicians will no longer be able to attempt to control inflation, printing money, debt, managing our economy, because we are no longer going to have the world's reserve currency. This was predictable. We saw it coming, and now it looks like it could be arriving. This is going to be a major economic blow to the U.S., also a strategic blow, but it's a self-inflicted blow in many ways.
Mark, can you explain what that means for me, the average American? I'm not in the government. I'm a citizen. I have a job. I have everything. Okay, we're moving off the petrodollar. This sounds like a bunch of lofty stuff that doesn't affect me at all. Why does it matter to me?
Well, this is what we use. It's the dollar that everyone uses when they have to buy energy. So this is the way the United States has propped up our dollar. So I remember I went to a UN conference. I went to Indonesia, and I was able to get lobster dinners for like $8 that would have cost $150 back at home. And the reason for that is we have a strong dollar versus all these other currencies. So by switching to the Chinese currency and Russia and India and all these other countries that are going to be leaving the US dollar, it's going to weaken our currency. We're going to end up paying more for trade. It's going to create higher inflation. It's going to create weaker economic growth. And it's going to have a huge devastating impact on our national security in terms of even our energy security. So it's actually, I wrote about this in my book, The Great Reset. And of course, I quoted the great economist Ron Paul, who warned about this and has been warning about it. The scary thing is Ron Paul's old conspiracy theories about the fall of the U.S. dollar and ergo our economy are now look like they're becoming realities.
Why is OPEC slashing production? What's all this mean?
Okay, there's a key thing. It's actually OPEC Plus that's slashing production. And I don't know if your viewers are aware, but OPEC Plus includes Russia. And that's a relatively recent development. We're not talking about just the Middle East OPEC. So this is Russia along with OPEC announcing these cuts in oil production. And this is going to, it's because they don't want to, because the price of oil has been dropping steadily in recent months, and they're trying to recapture it. Well, this is another consequence of harsh U.S. sanctions against Russia. They're now teamed up with the Middle East, who, by the way, Joe Biden has no problem shutting down domestic energy, shutting down Minnesota mines, North Dakota mines, and then buying stuff from Chinese mines. Same thing with U.S. oil, but then he goes to Venezuela and OPEC to beg. So they know they have us by the, you know what, and they are squeezing, and they're going to continue to squeeze. And now they have Russia on their team. Russia is laughing themselves all the way to the bank as our allegedly sanctions against them are harming. Well, now Russia's teamed up with the Middle East and OPEC oil countries, and they're punishing the West, who's been trying to punish them. So it's a game of high stakes international diplomacy on one hand, and it's, of course, the old OPEC cartel on the other. When the prices go low, they start, they reduce restrictions, increase restrictions on the supply. And it wouldn't matter if we were doing our own domestic oil production like we were just a few years ago, but it matters now.
What it's like to be energy independent. Mark, thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
Get planes coming in and getting them loaded, have medical screening, have security vetting, have diplomatic presence on the ground to make sure that we're putting the right people on planes, but also defend that airport from external threats. That's pretty remarkable. And so for all this talk of chaos, I just didn't see it, not from my perch.
But in hindsight, in reading this, does the president have any regrets about how this withdrawal was carried out?
The president's very proud of the manner in which the men and women of the military, the foreign service, the intelligence community, I went on and on and on, conducted this withdrawal. And he inherited a deal struck between the previous administration and the Taliban that called for the complete removal of all U.S. troops by May of 2021, or else the Taliban, which had stopped its attacks while the deal was in place, would go back to war against the United States.
There was a time in this country, really in every country, where failures, especially military failures, are met with harsh rebukes, resignations, firings, sometimes even worse throughout history. Now, they get up there and they declare that it was a rousing success. Oh, and it was also the other guy's fault. I cannot believe what's happened. Joining me now, Colonel Grant Newsham, former reserve head of intelligence for Marine Forces Pacific and author of the book, which we're going to get to in a moment, When China Attacks. Colonel, Semper Fi, I cannot, look, I'm not even old. I was just a 4-year dumb grunt Marine. And even when I was in, there was always accountability. If you had a bad patrol, there was accountability. Now the entire nation can embarrass itself in front of the world. No one gets fired.
Yeah, that's you said it. It leaves you almost speechless. As you said, who's to blame for what happened in Afghanistan? Apparently, it was leprechauns who did it. It would be nice just to have somebody say, look, yeah, we screwed up. We made some mistakes, but we're going to learn from it. And I have not seen anybody take any responsibility for what has happened. And now you have this fellow on TV claiming it was actually a great success. Well, if he thinks it was, why doesn't he go to Camp Pendleton and maybe address the 1st Marine Division, or go to the Veterans Hospital where the people who lost limbs in this abomination, where there are? Maybe why doesn't he go there and tell them what a great success it was? He won't. But this is something that I think that it's nauseating for most people. Just this complete lack of accountability for what has happened. If a Lance Corporal had done something, even remotely like this, or we know what Lance Corporals do, they would be absolutely hammered. In our case, it's upward promotions and end of tour awards. This is bad. We used to laugh about Saddam Hussein's spokesman, so-called Baghdad Bob, who said, nothing to see here. Well, there's American tanks, just outside the palace. We used to laugh about them, and we've kind of become like that. You don't say that with any sort of satisfaction. But I suppose at our ruling class level, they have opportunity to excel, is how one might charitably put it.
Gosh, that's a really great way to put it, and man, does that hit home. All right, I argue that was part of what has led this aggressive behavior by China. Not that China wasn't aggressive before, but they see things like this. They see weakness, stupidity, no accountability. Surely the Chinese look at that stuff and they start licking their chops for other opportunities that may be presented to them.
Well, that's what they do. There's that kind of a regime. I think Matt Pottinger, formerly with National Security Council, described it as a shark that's going around, just swims around looking for something to eat. And if it comes across steel, or say a shark cage, it kind of goes away, but it's always looking for something to eat. And they do make this equation, or this calculation, as to how likely are the Americans in particular to do something to us. And they'll look at an administration, and they'll look at whether it's confused, if it's preoccupied elsewhere, if it doesn't look like it has backbone. And that all goes into their calculation when deciding what to do and where to make a move. And they like what they saw in Afghanistan. And I'm not so sure who it is in this administration that actually scares them. And I don't say that with any sort of pleasure. But they will look at it and say, well, who are we afraid of? In the last administration, they could tell you who it was. It was Mike Pompeo, Pottinger, Miles Yu, Dave Stilwell, Peter Navarro. And they wanted those people gone. Well, they got their wish. And I think they're probably happier with what they have now.
Okay, which brings us to Taiwan. They've been doing all these air drills. They've been building amphibious vehicles. They are very clearly prepping to go in, right? You're the intelligence colonel. I'm an idiot corporal. What are they doing?
Well, they've set up a military that they think could have a reasonable chance of success if it attacks Taiwan. The analysts will differ on this. Some say, they're not quite there yet, or it's too hard to do amphibious operations. These kind of assaults, they're too complex. And unspoken as well, the Chinese just aren't smart enough to figure these out. Well, the Chinese are as smart as us, and in some ways they're even smarter, so I wouldn't underestimate them. But I think the People's Liberation Army has set itself up, developed capabilities that would make its leadership, or what really matters is make Xi Jinping think that if they use force against Taiwan, they just might have a chance of success, particularly if you combine that with a threat to the United States along the lines of, this is a domestic matter, you steer clear, or it's nuclear war. Depending on who's in the White House, you just might get the Americans to back off. But I would note that the Chinese would rather get Taiwan without fighting. And the Taiwanese presidential election that's coming up in January 2024 is very important. If really a pro-China candidate wins, China just might back off and expect him to deliver Taiwan, however unwillingly for most of the citizens. But if the candidate from the party that wants nothing to do with Chinese enslavement wins, then I think the gloves are off. And I would say that an armed attack on Taiwan is likely. So I would pay a lot of attention to early 2024. But in my opinion, the PLA has the capability to make life pretty darn miserable for Taiwan if they decide to have a go against them.
Colonel, I'm sure a bunch of people out there are a little surprised to hear you say China would have a chance at success. They look at China as this big, angry communist bear, really the new Soviet Union in the world, and they look at this wee little island of Formosa, or Taiwan as we now call it, and they think, wow, that's got to be no contest. Should be 30 seconds and it would be over. Why do you say reasonable chance of success instead of an absolute rout?
Oh, I don't think there's ever been a war that turned out exactly like people thought it would, for one thing. But you can make Taiwan a pretty darn tough nut to crack. If China goes after Taiwan, say it loses all of its navy in a couple afternoons, that's some problems. But a lot does depend on if the Americans get involved. If the Americans do, they can cause the Chinese military no end of trouble. But also consider that a fight for Taiwan is unlikely to be a narrowly confined thing, just to the area around Taiwan, with rules and limits, etc. But if you expand the battlefield, China has suddenly got some huge problems. It doesn't import nearly enough food, nearly enough energy to take care of its needs. It's absolutely dependent on exports to earn the dollars that it needs for everything that it has to pay for in real money. And it is vulnerable, say, to this sort of a cut in its imports, etc. And nobody's going to want to do much business with China if it does go after Taiwan. So it'll be free to deal with North Korea and Iran and Russia. But the China that is so dependent actually on foreign markets, they will find themselves without those things. So if America plays it right, and our military is still strong, it needs to sort of get better in certain key areas, but it could cause the Chinese a lot of trouble if it does things right. But also, as I said, spread the battlefield, and suddenly China is going to find itself headed back towards an agrarian society, like it was a long, long time ago. But that said, they've got a lot of nerve, and if they smell weakness, they just might try something.
Colonel, I can't see them waiting until the possibility of Joe Biden being out of the White House before they attempt something like this. I've maintained this for a while. Am I crazy in that? I just don't see how they would ever risk even the possibility of facing a Trump White House again or a DeSantis White House. Why would you wait until Joe's gone?
Oh, if you can get Taiwan subverted, and they've done a very good job of that actually over the last 50 years, if you can get Taiwan to feel just demoralized and tired and just like it has no chance, you could get basically a Taiwanese turncoat in office who can take a country where most people don't want to go. But what you've just stated, you could be right. One thing I do always caution when people expound on Taiwan and what's coming, everybody has their scenario of what's going to happen, and I've probably heard a dozen ones that are plausible. But so always keep that in mind, that nobody quite knows how this is going to play out. But I would say that China does have the military capability to think that they could go after Taiwan, and maybe have some prospects for success, especially if the Americans don't join in. But whether or not China will wait, well, I say that's debatable. I think they will at least wait until January 2024. And then after that, they'll make their calculations about the U.S. domestic situation. And it all gets weighed in, or factored in. And if they see in a confused America, say there's rioting in the streets because an unauthorized candidate doesn't win the election. Suppose we haven't got our financial house in order by then. Inflation's still very serious. Suppose Ukraine is a problem, still a problem, distracting us. Well, they may think that, well, even if it's a Republican, say, in the White House, they still got some time to make their move. But we're at this point we're just trying to make predictions. But what you've laid out could happen. I just see it a certain way, and it's not all that different. But I do think we're headed for trouble in the near future, say within a couple of years at least.
Courage is hard to come by these days. That's the way it goes when you get to late stage Republic era, and it's hard, very, very hard, to find somebody within a corrupted system willing to stand up to the corrupted system. That's real bravery. Steve Friend, very, very proud to know this guy. This guy's dedicated his life to serving this nation and was in the FBI and looked around in horror at what was happening within the walls of the FBI. And it's an honor to welcome him in the show now. He has a book out now called True Blue. He's also a senior fellow at the Center for Renewing America. I love that you landed on your feet, Steve. Appreciate you, brother.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Now, why'd you leave the FBI?
Well, it wasn't by choice of my own. They took my gun and badge and escorted me out of the building after a process where I came forward with my concerns about what was going on with the January 6th investigations.
Now, what was going on with the January 6th investigations that would prompt those concerns?
Well, my background with the FBI kind of is relevant to this because I came in 2014 and worked in a very remote location in the Midwest, worked on Indian reservations. And during that time, had the opportunity to open up about 200 cases, arrested about 150 violent criminals. So I got really familiar with the FBI's rule book for carrying forward investigations. So when my family relocated to Florida in 2021, with the understanding I was going to be working child pornography investigations, and I was unceremoniously transferred over to work on January 6 cases, that was the first opportunity I had to look at those cases, and became aware that the FBI is departing very greatly from its rules for the way that it's supposed to manage cases and index cases, and then also is employing some very aggressive tactics when it comes to apprehending some otherwise cooperative subjects.
Okay, so you were pulled from child pornography cases to go after these dangerous January 6ers, and you say the rules have changed. What were the rules? What are the rules now?
Well, in my entire experience, and for every other case that I've seen, when you open up a case, you own it, your office owns it. But when it came to January 6th, the cases, which should rightly be one case, opened up in Washington, D.C., a decision was made to open up a separate case for every single subject, and instead of running them on paper from Washington, disseminating them to the field. So now we've created this illusion that there are thousands of domestic terrorism cases that are spread around to Cleveland and Sacramento and El Paso, when in fact the numbers that are substantiating that are all generated from this one-time 4-hour incident. And the reason for that is simply to juke the stats, to create this false impression that domestic terrorism is on the rise, as we've heard from our elected officials so often over the last few years. And then also, those numbers are tied to compensation for senior executives within the FBI. Meeting those metrics means that they get 5-finger bonuses.
5-finger bonuses at the FBI for busting people on the right. I guess I shouldn't speak out of turn. You were in the FBI. Are these domestic terrorism cases, are they focused at all on the left, or is this 100% going after Republicans?
Well, certainly everything related to January 6th, there's a conservative focus on that, as we've seen, as folks have been brought in and arrested and really had the book thrown at them for misdemeanor crimes in a lot of cases. Now, look, I'm not going to dispute that there are some individuals that conduct themselves in an abhorrent way. They should be tried for the crimes that they committed. And that was really what my concern was. I was not coming at it from a political angle. My concern was that since the FBI is not following its rules, we might wind up losing at trial for a righteous investigation, for a righteous prosecution. And I felt that we, as a matter of due process, should reveal that information to those defendants, because regardless of what you're accused of in this country, when you stand trial, you're entitled to mount a defense, and that includes exculpatory evidence. And the FBI has not made that information public, just like it's not made the surveillance tape from inside the Capitol public.
Steve, can you explain how the FBI got so broken? Is it just a few people at the top? Because I got to be honest, man, I'm thrilled you came forward. I'm thrilled guys like Kyle came forward, but man, there aren't very many of you.
No, there's not. And I think there's a huge disconnection between the rank and file who are working in the field on cases and sort of keeping their heads down and hoping that their number doesn't get called up. And management class, the folks that are in Washington, D.C., that are making these decisions, those people tend to be very ambitious. They tend to be more politically to the left, because that whole process is sort of self-selecting. If you want to promote in the FBI, the idea is you got to come up with something new. And certainly if you're a conservative, you're looking for things to cut. We'll eliminate that waste. But as you climb those ladder rungs and they get slipperier and slipperier, you have to come up with new things, and you also have to attach yourself to large, important cases. And as we've been told, January 6th is now considered the most important investigation in the history of the Bureau, more important than September 11th, more important than the Civil War. And now the FBI and folks who want to rise through the management ranks are tempted to get their hooks into it and say that we're in some sort of leadership capacity on this very, very important case.
Okay, that really concerns me even more than I already was, because that doesn't sound like we've got some bad actors in management. That sounds like there's a structural problem. And if there's a structural problem, how in the world can we fix that?
I don't think that it's redeemable at this point. I think that the low T GOP, as you're prone to call them, needs to look at funding the FBI in the upcoming budget debates and debt limit ceiling debates. Funding the FBI is funding your enemy. It is no different than our U.S. military leaving behind war materiel, equipment, and weapons for the Taliban in Afghanistan. You do not provide aid and comfort to your political enemy. And in this case, the FBI has now elected to become a weaponized arm of the communist political left in America.